Okay. Oh, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabriel Hurst. I am the Assistant Culture Affairs Officer here at the U.S. Embassy. First and foremost, I wanted to thank you all and welcome you all for joining us here today, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce to you all Mr. Richard Nyok. He is a futurist, author, and speaker with a background in computer science and media studies. He helps clients and audiences identify tomorrow's opportunities and challenges with a focus on leveraging the knowledge for future success. He is a former computing and AL contributing editor for the Futurist magazine and has been published by and quoted in the New York Times, Scientific American, Fast Company, Wired, Word Future Review, Psychology Today, BBC News, and many more. An executive board member of the Association of Professional Futurists, he's also a member of the National Association of Science Writers and a TED speaker. Richard lives in Seattle, and his recent book, Heart of the Machine, explores the future of computers that are able to interact with human emotions. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Richard Nyok. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. I am delighted to be here today, to be able to visit this beautiful country and to be able to speak with all of you about the future of the global marketplace. I'd also like to welcome our online audience who have the opportunity to ask questions via the Facebook comment line in the event that you have any questions, and we'll be answering some of those at the end of the talk. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the future of the global marketplace. And in the course of doing this, I'm going to address a few of the mega trends that are going to be driving and pushing this along. It's going to be influencing the future, but there are a lot of other factors. So we're going to be talking about a number of new technologies, some that you most certainly have heard of, but hopefully I'll be giving you some new information about where these are going and how they might impact and affect our world and the world of business and commerce. And then finally, we'll also talk a little bit about some of the possible strategies that we can use to utilize these in the course of building our future as we move forward. Now, that's really an interesting phrase when you think about it, building the future. What does that really mean? I mean, we know what the present is. It's all of this. It's the here and now. And the past, we pretty much understand that because it used to be our present. But the future is something else entirely. There's nothing predestined, nothing predetermined about what's going to happen from one day to the next. Each of us goes through our lives, and regularly we come to a fork in the road, and we have to make a choice, a decision. And when we make that choice, one future becomes a little more certain, and another a little less so. And we do this with choices and decisions dozens, perhaps hundreds of times a day. 7.5 billion people on this planet do this. And over time, each of these decisions and choices come together and they form the present. And it's not the future anymore. It's now. So this is why futurists like myself talk about futures plural. Not a future or the future, because the future is potential. And that's what we're here to talk about today. The potential for our businesses and organizations, the potential for our families and for ourselves, and the potential to not just build a future, but to dream, to plan, and ultimately to create a better tomorrow. Now, as Gabriel said, my name's Richard Nyok. I'm a futurist, and what I basically do is I work with organizations and businesses to better understand and prepare for tomorrow's world. That's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today. Now, in the course of talking about the future of the global marketplace, we're going to explore a few different things, but as I say, the first thing I want to talk about is some of the megatrends that are ongoing and are going to influence this future. The first of these is one that we're all familiar with, and this is demographics, the different aspects within different societies, different cultures, or different countries and different regions. There we go. Thank you. Where we have different elements about the given region or the given country, the average ages, and the different distribution of ages, different distributions of wealth, how large is the middle class, how much higher education is available. All of these things go into making up the demographics of a particular country, and it ends up influencing all kinds of different economic aspects. It influences the productivity, the economic growth, savings rates, housing market trends, the investment that government may make, and so forth. And all of these need to be kept in mind. When we look at demographics, we have a lot of different countries, and this influences where we're going to do trade, where we're going to be shipping different commodities and so forth. So a country like Japan or Germany is relatively old in terms of its average population. Average population in those countries is about 47. The US is a little younger. It's about 38. Vietnam has an average age of 30, and I believe India's around 28. A number of countries in Africa are only 20 or 21 as an average. Each of these influences how that country is going to grow, how rapidly it's going to grow, and these are all factors that we want to consider and think about as we move into the future. Another really important thing that most of us are worrying about is climate change. There's a lot of harm that's going to come from this, and it's going to really impact not just our lives and that of the world, but it's going to impact business as well. The number of problems that arise from this because of reductions in crop yields, impact on fishing stocks, the problems that occur when you have more frequent natural disasters occurring in a country, the displacement of populations because of rising sea levels. All of these things have to be considered and factored as well. Even something like transportation, where shipping is impacted because of an increased number of superstorms that prevent perhaps some of the trade that was, or regularity of trade that might have happened in decades past. One of the other trends that I really think is very exciting is that of urbanization. Now, this is an ongoing trend that has been taking place for centuries. And when you talk about urbanization, you're essentially talking about the rate that more people are living in cities, the idea that we are overall gathering more and more in urban centers as a population, as a global population. And this is going to continue, especially during these next 2 to 3 decades. So where right now, according to the United Nations, the entire planet, about 55% of the entire population lives in an urban setting. That is expected to grow to 68% by 2050. That means an additional 2.5 billion people are going to be living in cities in 30 years' time. Think about what that means in terms of what has to happen in terms of new building, new infrastructure. How are we going to deal with that? And how are we going to utilize the technologies that we're going to be talking about in order to make that feasible? That is a lot of people, and that's going to take a lot of different approaches to make that work. Now, overall, all of this is going to be driven by new technologies. Today I'm going to be talking about quite a few different emerging technologies and the different ways that these are going to not just impact us as individuals, but how they are going to be used in business, made to create both new products, new services, but also just literally change the way that we do business with each other as companies. So that's something that's going to be, I think, very, well, we'll get into it in a minute. The other thing that's going to transform is the customer experience. The way that people interact with products through social media, through all kinds of new technologies will be used to create new experiences. The entire process is going to become much more experientially based. The idea of being able to engage a customer in this way has a lot of pluses in terms of making them feel that they have investment in it. And so that's something that's also going to be an ongoing trend. But it's not just about the customers, it's also about business. It's also about how do we continue to move goods about, as one simple example. Autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars, self-driving trucks are going to be a reality very, very shortly. Right now, we are kind of just on the beginning edges of this, but it's going to be very capable. We're going to have vehicles that can drive in urban settings in very, very controlled and safe ways toward the end of this coming decade. 2030 is when most of the general consensus is that true self-driving capability arrives. Maybe a couple years earlier, maybe a couple years later. Anyway, we could talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Another aspect about what's going to be happening that affects business is our ability to control and to be able to track the supply chain, to be able to have the level of control that we'll have through things like the Internet of Things, to be able to know exactly where certain materials and resources are in terms of the order, in terms of having them immediately when we need them, to be able to have the level of granularity, the level of detail in the tracking, to be able to know, have really good quality control throughout the entire process. That is going to both make it a more efficient process, but it's also going to reduce, over time, reduce costs. So we're going to be talking about a number of new technologies in a moment. And as we do, let's just keep in mind that there's a few different things I'd like you to think about as this happens. And maybe this will spark some ideas for the Q&A portion. When we look at a new technology, what are some of the possible products that it could lead to? Not just right now, but in 10 years' time, 20 years' time. This is really important to keep in mind, because just because we can engineer something, just because we can build it, doesn't mean the world is ready for it yet. There are a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that have to be in place. So you have to have the customer, the society be ready. They may not feel that they want that product yet. You have to have the necessary infrastructure to support it. You need to have the necessary buy-in from, depending on where you are, the regulatory agencies and so forth. Those parts of our government and institutions that are there to protect us. Self-driving cars, one of the harder parts to get, humps to get over, is going to be how do we ensure that that people are as safe as possible, and those regulatory agencies are going to insist that be the case. How is it going to affect customer behavior? How is it going to affect customer engagement? Is this a technology that's going to lead to a new infrastructure? Just think about something like the internet. The internet's only been around for 50 years. It began in 1969. And at that time, it really wasn't very much to it. But right now, today, our world exists the way it does because of the internet. If it wasn't for that infrastructure, your smartphones wouldn't work, we wouldn't be communicating on social media, the way that we do business in terms of interacting between companies, the ordering, and everything else, none of that would exist without the internet in the form that it does today. It has sped things up, it has made things more efficient. Looking ahead at some of these other technologies, which of these might lead to a new infrastructure, whether we're talking about something like Elon Musk's Hyperloop or some other infrastructure that is going to be essential, whether it's of a physical nature or a virtual one. Ultimately, all of this is going to be driven by information. Information is what is making all of this possible. Progress has been accelerating for a very long time. But in recent years, it's really information that has made this accelerate much more because information has some very unique properties. It's very easy to make it grow exponentially. Now, when we talk about exponential growth, basically we're talking about something that doubles and doubles and doubles again on some kind of regular pace, some kind of regular rate. And when that happens, it catches us by surprise. It's really hard for us to anticipate exponential growth because we didn't evolve to recognize this as we became human beings. Linear change is something that benefited us. To be able to recognize it and see it in our environment, that was very important for our survival. Being able to recognize that cell colonies grow in an exponential form, or nowadays the idea of something like in finance having compound interest, that's also exponential change. There really wasn't a reason for us to be able to evolve to recognize that. So it's something that catches us regularly by surprise. And we'll explain why in a minute. But just as an example, and this is something I think many of you have probably heard at some point in your school, but let's just consider for a moment a large pond, a small lake. When I talk about this in the States, I'll usually say it's 1 million square feet in area. Let's say that it's about 100,000 square meters. So it's a sizable pond. It's good size. And on that pond is one single lily pad. It's 1 square foot. Let's say it's 1,000 square centimeters, this lily pad. And there's going to be 1 lily pad on the first day. The second day there's going to be 2, and we're going to keep doubling. So the next day 4, then 8, then 16, and so forth. We go all the way out to day 15, and we look down on our pond, and hardly anything has changed. We look around, it's mostly open water. 97% of this pond is open water. Only 3% is lily pads. And yet in only four more days time, on day 19, half of that pond is covered, and in one more day, on day 20, everything is covered with lily pads. Not just that, let that extend for another 10 days to the end of a 30-day month. On day 30, 1,000 similar ponds would be covered. That's the power of exponential growth and exponential change. And it's why it's really hard for us to visualize it sometimes. One person that I think most of us know is Bill Gates of Microsoft. And he once said, we tend to overestimate the amount of change that happens in 2 to 3 years and underestimate the amount that will happen in 10. And this encompasses this idea. But why should this be? Well, one way to talk about it is, or to look at it, is to consider these two curves. Here we have the orange exponential curve. It's an S curve, but it essentially grows exponentially. and a gray line that represents a linear progression. If you look at the first half, you can see that the growth on the exponential curve is happening much slower. And so people's expectations get ahead of the reality. But all of a sudden, at a certain point, it shoots up, and all of a sudden we now are at a point when whatever that growth is, whether it's technology or lily pads or something else, our expectation is actually undershooting what the reality is. And that's pretty much what exponential change does each and every time. It doesn't matter if it's happening annually, every month, or every day. It still grows in this manner. So that really needs some other way of thinking about it, though, that's less abstract, that is something we can all relate to. So let's just take a quick journey back into the past. The year is 1989, and Intel has created a new consumer CPU, and it's called the 80486. We're just a little hot on the mic, if we could take it down just a smidge. Or am I near the speaker? So Intel had created this. Intel was co-founded by Gordon Moore, who happened in the mid-60s to write a paper that eventually made him famous, much more famous than he already was. And we have Moore's Law because of this. Moore's Law is basically saying the number of transistors that are on a CPU, a processing chip, doubles on a regular basis. In this case, Moore was saying between 1 to 1.5 years. And when he looked at this, he saw that this was going to continue for quite some time. And if it did, that was going to be a lot of transistors on a chip. Sure enough, Intel created in 1971 the first CPU. It had 2,300 transistors on it, which was phenomenal at the time. 1989. We let that compound for a while, and we get to the point where now this chip, top end for consumer computers, 1 million transistors on there. It ran at a blazing 40 megahertz per second, which is about 1% of our clock speeds on our computers today. And even though it had all of that, it still needed a large power supply. It needed a bunch of additional RAM, additional supporting chipsets, and so forth. It really didn't have much in the way of any kind of Ethernet or no wireless capability back at that time. And at that time, in the US, it cost $3,000 to $4,000 US. Well, jump ahead to not even 3 decades later. And in 2017, IBM decided they wanted to create something that's equivalent to that 486 chip. It is not a CPU, not a processing unit. It's a complete computer. It has RAM, it has storage, it has wireless capability, it has harvesting, power harvesting capability. You can load an operating system onto it directly. And what you see on that person's fingertip is not one of these. It is 64 complete computers. Here on this pile of table salt is a 1 millimeter computer. One of these that we can load an operating system onto. Now that is the power of exponential growth, and it's going to continue. These are going to continue to become faster, smaller, and more importantly, cheaper, because that first, I mentioned, that prior computer was $3,000 to $4,000 US. This costs 1/10 of $1 US to make. It costs 10 cents to make today. So that progression is going to make possible all kinds of new capabilities as we move into the future. So today we're going to talk about some of these, and just keep in mind that all of these are affected by exponential change, whether we're talking about artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, quantum computing. All of these are essentially impacted by exponential growth. And Some of them are at a younger stage than others, but they're all going to go through very similar kinds of growth spurts as we have seen with computing. And that's going to lead to a very interesting and a very different world than the one we live in today. So when we talk about these technologies, probably the one that is on most everybody's lips these days and is really, affecting almost every aspect of our society is artificial intelligence, AI. Artificial intelligence is not one thing. It is many different things, and it already has transformed our world, but really it's only just beginning. Now, we'll talk about a little bit more about it in a moment, but when you consider how big AI has become, when we look at its total impact as a function of GDP, it's expected in 2020, pretty much right now, it's anticipated that it has a global impact of $2 trillion. In one decade, by 2030, that number, this is PricewaterhouseCoopers put this out. In 2030, it's anticipated that is going to octuple. It's going to grow 8-fold, so that we're talking about 16 trillion. That not only represents an enormous amount of new capacity and new investment, but it tells you where we're going to be putting our emphasis, what people think is important. That's an enormous amount of growth, but it's also an enormous investment in our future. But as I say, AI, artificial intelligence, is many different things. And when you look back on its history, about 60 years ago, it really began. And early on, it was very much something that was hard-coded rules. We would create these rules. It was very symbolic in nature. And we got a few things out of it, but it wasn't overly, there was only so much we could do. We could only take it so far. And this was called the first wave of AI, or it has become known more recently as the first wave of AI. We're now in a period where people are calling the second wave of AI. It's the neural networks, the connectivist methods. So the methods that allow us to have credit card fraud detection, to recognize images on a search engine, to be able to drive autonomous vehicles. That's all using neural networks. That's the second wave. And it's done amazing things in this past decade in particular. But early on, we were developing some of this. We didn't have the processing power to actually implement it. In more recent years, we have, and that's made a lot of it much more possible. But that's just the second wave. Right now, many different institutions and companies and businesses are working on what's known as the third wave of AI. And this is essentially artificial intelligence that will be able to perform abstract thought, abstract thinking, to have common sense, to understand causality, to be able to learn much more like a human child does in an incremental and limited instance type of learning, as opposed to the neural networks today where we throw 100,000, 1,000,000 records at it to have it be able to statistically recognize something. This will be much more similar. It won't be the same. It'll be much more similar to the way that we think about the world. Well, that's going to lead to really different business opportunities, different ways of having customers and people in general interact with technology. If a technology can actually sort of understand what you're saying, not just recognize some statistical regularity in some text, in some of the words you use, but to actually understand in its own fashion, that's powerful. And one of the technologies that we are going to increasingly see used for this is speech. conversational technologies, conversational interfaces. We're seeing more and more of these around the world, and it's essentially the idea that one of the most basic things that we do as a means of communication is speech. It's very natural for us. We now have the ability to have these systems recognize and interact with us on this level. And it still feels very rudimentary. It still feels kind of like a toy these days. But that's not going to go on for long. You have things like Amazon has their Alexa Prize. This is a competition of PhD level university teams working to create a conversational interface, a device that can interact with a person in a conversation on a number of different subjects intelligently for a minimum of 20 minutes. Now, I've been a finalist judge for this for a couple of years, and they are getting really good. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting really close. And it's only going to be a matter of a couple of years before that we get past that barrier. But that's just using neural networks. That's using techniques that we use today. Imagine that third wave of AI I was just discussing. Imagine what that means if you have that kind of artificial intelligence tied to a conversational interface. There's all kinds of possibilities, all kinds of ways that this could be used to interact with teams, with individuals. The sky is the limit in terms of how much innovation could be done with this. But it's only one interface. We have a lot of other interfaces that we're developing, we've been developing. Wearables are certainly something that are going to be used more and more. They're going to be especially used in terms of healthcare, in terms of routinely and regularly tracking our bodies, our health, feeding this information in a way that allows us to rapidly, quickly, early detect problems and be able to, through micro interventions, be able to have our health restored before things get too bad, before big problems occur. So that's powerful. As I say, those small, very small computers are going to pretty much keep getting smaller. And as they do, that means we can put them anywhere. That's what the Internet of Things is about. The idea of having smart sensors everywhere, anywhere in our environment, in urban centers, in rural areas, in nature. The idea of being able to track and protect against erosion, against different problems in our environment, that's capable, it would be capable of that as well. And the idea that it keeps getting smaller is essentially pervasive, is essentially everywhere. That means that ultimately, we don't have to carry these guys around all the time. We have our technology everywhere we go. It just needs to be able to identify and authenticate who we are, where we are. So those are a couple of thoughts about some of the interfaces we're going to work with. But we can't talk about technology and AI without talking about and thinking about robotics and what that's going to mean for our world. Robotics has been enormously transformative in terms of business, for manufacturing and so forth. And it's becoming more and more prevalent, more and more something that we use in a lot of other types of business. We're seeing it impact or be used more and more in office work, in terms of more intellectual or I don't even know what the term is in Vietnam, but white collar work. So work that is essentially office work and things like this. This is going to be more and more prominent in time. And as this happens, we have a lot of concern about what's going to happen to jobs. What's going to happen as AI and automation becomes more and more powerful and essentially can theoretically replace a number of the different tasks that we do. Well, there's different thoughts about this, and I think we're a little early on that worry. There's going to be definite job loss, but there's also still going to very much be the need for human intelligence for all kinds of different aspects of the work that we're going to be doing. So more and more, we're going to see people and robots, people and AIs, people and software working together in order to utilize what each of our strong points. That we will do the kinds of intellectual tasks that we're good at. We'll use the AIs to do the things that they're particularly good at. That's, I think, what we're going to see, at least for another 20 to 30 years. Other types of robotics that we typically don't always think of as robots, but certainly autonomous vehicles are robots. That's what they are. And we're going to see this become more and more part of our cities, part of our infrastructure. A few of the things that happen when you start to look at what's going to happen with transforming into a society of using self-driving cars is certain things have to change. We don't need parking lots anymore. Not if we're going to move to something that's makes more sense with this, such as a subscription model, something that's the equivalent of the Grabs and the, well, not Grab, but Uber and so forth. And the idea that what you need much more than parking lots is drop-off and pickup areas. And that changes how we design our cities and how we design our facilities and airports and businesses and so forth. So all of that provides opportunities for building and doing things in a different way than we do today. As we move forward with this, there's a lot of other ways we will use autonomous vehicles. We have a number of different companies these days working on delivery bots. They're pretty much last mile kind of delivery systems. I'm kind of holding judgment on that. I'm not sure where that's going to go or how successful that's going to be because of a couple of different factors, but also because another robot that's coming along that's going to be used more and more for delivery, and in some ways more sense for certain types of environments, is the drone. The drone has once this becomes autonomous, once this can actually deliver on its own, possibilities here for rapid distribution and to essentially move away from the 2D transport method that we use today, that's going to be pretty frequently used, I think, much more than the idea of these little bots delivering a package around the neighborhood and that kind of thing. So in all of this, as I say, we have a shifting demographic where we're going to have urbanization occurring. We're going to see 2.5 billion more people living in city areas. We're going to have to build places for them to work, to live, to get around through. And some of the things that are going to help to do this are going to be the new materials that we're developing. We have things like transparent aluminum, transparent solar cells. Imagine an entire building with glass that has the capability of being a window but also can generate electricity. Self-healing concrete. There are also concretes that are being worked on that actually absorb carbon dioxide, CO2. They're one of the worst offenders of actually CO2 creation. So here would be at least a partial solution to some of the problems that we're generating with global warming. Aerogel is a really cool, it's the lightest insulator we have. It is a pretty phenomenal material. And we might be even using this in the course of construction. But the other thing that we're going to be doing is constructing using very different techniques, automating processes, using assembly line methods that have been worked and been used in a lot of other industries as well. The construction industry has been lagging a little bit behind in this manner. And so using different types of modular building, using a range of techniques that allow us to create more efficiency in the course of building is something that we'll also be doing. But I think the one that's really cool, we've all been hearing about 3D printing for quite a while, and initially it was pretty much used for printing toys. It's actually developed to the point now we can print body parts to a limited degree, and a range of other things, but there are actually now 3D printed houses. We actually have 3D printers of a scale and using materials that allow us to be able to print a house. Now, the idea is it can be done more rapidly, much more cheaply, and given what we have to achieve in terms of this future we're talking about, this could be a very important tool. So you have a concept like this that was printed a couple of years ago in Austin, Texas. This was printed for a matter of, well, much less than it costs to build a house these days, and it was printed, I believe, in 24 or 48 hours. It was very quick. That's the beginning. As I say, exponential change means that while some of these technologies look a little rough, look a little slow initially, they get better and better and better. And so you already, in this past year or so, in Dubai, they have the largest 3D printed building in the world. It's about it's 2 stories, it's about 6,400 square feet. I won't, but that's the next stage. Now, where does that go from there? I'm not sure. There, I think, are going to be limits to how much you can build in terms of height using this technique, but already the idea of using it for housing, low-income housing in some parts of the world, using it for dealing with disasters, for displaced communities and so forth, it's a method of rapid response that is really pretty innovative when you think about it. So we've been talking about a lot of different hard technologies, things that we, think of as pretty much, science. Well, this is still science, but new technology, relatively new. It's close to my heart because I've written an entire book about it. This is artificial emotional intelligence. It's sometimes known as emotion AI or originally affective computing. If you're spelling that, that's effective with an A. And it's technology that where a computer can read and interact with human emotions. Now, that's pretty wild when you think about it, but it's also the kind of thing that's been missing all this time. When we interact with computers, when we interact with technology, we frequently get frustrated because we know what we want, but it doesn't. Well, the idea of a technology being able to understand or recognize that a person, whether you're talking about someone who's doing word processing, someone who is taking a lesson, an online lesson, to actually have the system know that the person's getting frustrated, maybe angry, maybe bored, and change the program, change what it's doing as a result. That's pretty useful. This technology is already being used in business. It originally started in terms of brand marketing for audience testing and things like that, but it rapidly has started in fashion, in different parts of education and healthcare, and even there's some automotive consortium that is using it for the in-cabin experience for users to, right now, mostly to recognize driver awareness. Are you actually paying attention to the road or falling asleep? But in time, think about autonomous vehicles. If you have a self-driving car that is taking someone somewhere and there's no other person in there, just yourself, the person in there, something happens. Maybe they have a seizure, something bad. You don't want that vehicle to just keep driving on. You want it to recognize there's a problem, to alert emergency services, perhaps to get the person somewhere safe. So that's actually very, very powerful and useful technology. And when you look at where it could be used, really it's a matter of everywhere there are humans involved, that there are people involved. That's a place of opportunity because we are emotional creatures. We are who we are because of our emotions. So if we really want our technologies to serve us well, this is a really good method to allow us to interface with it in a way that we've never have before. So I'm just going to take a moment to take a couple of these technologies that we're talking about and a few more we're going to talk about in a minute. And let's just explore the scenario. So we have a young woman shopping on a high street, perhaps a mall, but it's in an environment where maybe 15 years from now, let's say it's 2035. And she's walking along, she's doing some window shopping, she's wearing her Louis Vuitton augmented reality glasses. And as she looks in the windows, she's getting all kinds of additional information about the products. She's getting their prices, where it's been sourced. She's able to see some information about competing products, perhaps some competitive pricing. And by doing this, she's able to be a smarter shopper, a better shopper, but it also creates an opportunity for a very, very different way of interacting because as she walks through this street, some of the cameras on the shops, their exterior cameras, are checking the street. They happen to see her. They use some different types of subscription services that they tie into, and they suddenly have information about what's her demographic, what's her buying habits, what's her style. And in doing this, the shop decides, you know, she might like this new dress we got. And so it sends information to her glasses that offers her this dress. Well, she just kind of, we don't really see very much, but she just makes just enough of a response that the system, the camera, is able to recognize she's not interested, but using predictive analytics, it's able to determine with 87% accuracy, let's say as an example, that in fact what she would like is the new jacket that they just got in. So it generates a quick avatar of her, sends it to her glasses, modeling the jacket, and sends a little flash 30-minute coupon. She goes into the store, and this purchase is made very, very rapidly. Now, this is a really different way of interacting with shoppers, and one that has opportunities to provide a much more beneficial customer experience, but also changes things because you have a positive feedback loop. You have something going on here where the technology is interacting with the person so rapidly that it's a little scary, it's a little bit predatory. So we want to be careful about the kinds of futures that we're building. We need to anticipate what can happen when we extend some of these ideas and see where they're going to go. Over time, whether it's this technology or any number of others, all kinds of additional supporting technologies are going to develop and around it. It's going to create an ecosystem of systems, of protocols. Just remember the early days of computing. Things were just getting started. We were still establishing all kinds of different things. We couldn't even send a video to each other at that time. Over time, all kinds of supporting technologies and protocols and services came to exist that made all of that possible. And the same thing's going to happen with a bunch of these other technologies as well. And one of those is going to be the Internet of Things, and it's going to be driving a lot of this because all those sensors we were talking about, all of those inexpensive little computers that will be in our environment, they will be generating a lot of information that we can use for good things and bad. So when you talk about possible use cases, there's been a number of different ways that this Internet of Things, which is only just getting started, has started to be used. So the idea that you can now use it in conjunction with smart LED lighting to reduce street lighting electricity use by something like 75%. Airlines have been using this concept more and more to try to eke out just that little bit of extra efficiency as they're flying from one place to another, because all you have to do is improve that efficiency by 2 to 3%, and annually you're talking about a savings of something like $5 to $8 billion savings in fuel. And that varies because depending on the cost of fuel at the time. And a more specific example, a couple of years ago, Royal Dutch Shell, who has oil fields all over the world, but they happen to have a number in Africa. And a number of these are very remote. They have to spend a lot of money maintaining them, monitoring them, sending people out there. They're hard to get to. So they invested $87,000 in some different sensors, smart sensors, to use in conjunction with these oil wells. In the first year, they saved $1 million, and they continued to save $1 million each year after that because they were able to monitor and address things in ways that they had never been able to before. So that's a lot of very serious benefit. Now, all of that Internet of Things has to communicate somehow. If you're going to be in some remote part of the world, you can't run a Ethernet cable or any other kind of trunk line to every single part of the world. How are we going to deal with that? Well, people like SpaceX has been working on Starlink. You have Amazon working on the Kuiper project. These are basically constellation satellites that idea is to encircle the Earth with them, and they can create very low cost over time, low cost and low latency communication, so that all of this Internet of Things, no matter how remote a part of the world it's in, will be able to communicate with this. So that's, again, something it's an opportunity. Obviously, someone like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos are not doing this only because they want to do some good things. They also want to make some money, and there will be opportunities there. But in time, this will be part of our new communication infrastructure. And all of that communication, all of that Internet of Things is going to generate a lot of data, a lot of information. And as it does so, we have to figure out what we're going to do with it. But one of the things we have been finding out is that when you have so much good information, you can put it out there, you can use AI, you can use different mining techniques, and you can get all kinds of new insights about whether that is about customer behavior, whether that is about different aspects of a particular business model. Anyway, that data mining can ultimately become much more powerful as we generate more and more information from the Internet of Things. And as I say, when we talk about how many computers we're talking about, we're not talking about thousands or millions of computers in the environment. People like Cisco and are talking about trillions of these devices. Now, when you think about trillions, how do you set that up? How do you configure it? How do you secure it? Well, you can't. You can't have enough IT department to be able to do that. So you have to have means of automating this. And one of the ways that people are talking about, and in time, it may work, I just don't think it's going to work quite the way it's working right now, is the blockchain. So blockchain is the underlying foundation for certain cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. These are virtual currencies that I'm sure you've heard about. But the blockchain can be used for any number of different types of contracted control purposes. So if you can utilize a method like this to automate the installation, configuration, and securing of those devices, That's what it's going to take, because as I say, it's not going to be humanly possible for us just to do it. And if you've got that much data, that much information, you also need to really step up your cybersecurity. And that's going to be another business opportunity as well, because our world is really hurting from the amount of damage that is being caused by cyber criminals, by hackers. It's estimated something like $5 or $6 trillion annually as an overall impact on businesses. You have businesses that are taken out of circulation for months at a time. You have businesses now that actually go out of business if they get hit with badly in this case. And so we actually really need to, all of us, all businesses, present and future, need to be thinking seriously about this, investing seriously in it, because without well-secured devices, and believe me, the Internet of Things is going to open up a lot of holes. If we don't secure those, we're going to have a lot of problems. Quantum computing is something that people are just starting to really think about and talk about as far as what the potential is. We just heard the other day Google talking about having quantum supremacy. Well, I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but what you will not have quantum computers on your desk. You will probably use it as a service, but what this can do is perform tasks that in our ordinary computers simply cannot. Our classical computers would take till the end of the universe to be able to perform the necessary calculations that these can do for certain types of problems. And what they do is when you look at certain types of optimization problems, whether you're talking about identifying the most efficient way to move goods and materials around, the most efficient ways to use different resources, that's what these are really good for. And over time, this could become something of a subscription model. Already, D-Wave, who makes this particular chip, D-Wave is in Vancouver, BC, and they have started to make this available as a subscription model that they can use, that people can use to try out and test their own algorithms, their own problems, and see if they can do things using this technology. But it will remain very, very complex for quite some time, and therefore it's not going to be something that you just plug and play in your own home or your own office. It requires, at least at this time, some temperatures that are near absolute zero, and some very, very careful and isolated methods of interacting with this technology. So we're getting close to the end of our talk, and I can't not talk about virtual reality and augmented reality, because these are technologies that are just really getting started. We've been trying to get virtual reality to a point where we really can use it commercially for about 30 years, a good 30 years. It's coming to the point where we're actually starting to see some major inroads. I'm actually a little surprised. Virtual reality seems to be a hint ahead of augmented reality. And so virtual reality is where you are entirely part of a virtual or an artificial environment. Ideally you're wearing some form of goggles, and you aren't seeing the rest of the world. You're in a created world. Augmented reality is something, sometimes you'll see it on a sports event when you're watching TV. You'll see certain things that are superimposed on the field. And this is essentially the same kind of concept. If you have glasses that are augmented reality glasses, then you're going to see certain things superimposed on your environment. And these can provide information, as we saw with our example of the high street shopper. But you can also use it for all kinds of different training purposes, and so forth. So you're going to see this technology used for education. You're going to see it used for training, for very expensive and dangerous types of installations and equipment, the opportunity to work on it in a very, very realistic fashion, but in a safe way for both the equipment and for yourselves. That is also one way it'll be used. It'll certainly be used in terms of entertainment, because we love to be entertained, whether we want to be scared or be just experiencing some form of fantasy. But in terms of business, the other way it's going to be used more and more is for virtual meetings. Now, right now, we've had for a little while some rudimentary ways of doing this, but as this becomes really capable, as it becomes indistinguishable from how we exist right now, if you have a virtual digital double that is pretty much able to interact with someone else on the other side of the world in a you're able to interact with them and whether it's for a business meeting or for certain types of consultation, that means you save time, it means you save fuel, you save the planet. Some good opportunities come out of that. Ultimately, it's going to be used for improving customer experience, the idea that maybe you will have, even whether it's in a shop or even at home, a smart mirror that you can make purchases, see how you're going to look in a particular outfit, or check out different aspects of perhaps a vacation experience, things like this. In terms of advertising, there's a lot of interesting possibilities. This is a still from a relatively new company, just came out of called Riff. And Riff is a product placement company. And what they do is they use AI, and you can say, oh, for this commercial, please put a Coke bottle on this table. But you don't need to tell it where to put it. See, the AI can actually know, oh, we don't want to put the Coke bottle on the actor's head. We don't want it on the floor. It will put it in very specific places in the scene. And that's actually going to, I think, be pretty well monetized in time. Digital doubles, the idea that we now are at the point where we can have actors more and more be essentially fully digitized. In the case of Star Wars, Lucasfilm actually has the digital rights to all of the actors and is able to utilize them, as in this last couple of movies, in a way that really we might want to think about what that means for entertainment and for the actors going forward. On the one hand, that's their livelihood, that's who they are. But if you protect them, it gives them an opportunity for new ways of generating income as well, because perhaps they want to be able to be in two places at once, to be able to perform in different types of media at the same time. Ultimately, all of this is going to lead to a very different world in terms of business, in terms of entertainment, in terms of customer experience. But overall, it's up to all of us how we are going to shape this future. We are the ones who get to determine how we want to see this happen. It's not just about how we invent things, but how we give feedback about, is this the kind of future, is this the kind of implementation of a given technology that we want to see? Because we're the ones who determine how that future is going to ultimately be built. And so with that, I would hope that that gives you a few ideas about the future that we're all building. And I thank you all so much for your time today and the opportunity to speak with you. So thank you. And we will be doing Q&A, I believe.
Có bạn nào có câu hỏi dành cho bác Richard không ạ?
Yes.
Maybe in Vietnam we are very mostly highly impressive. You are very clear excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Very excellent presentation and useful information
Thank you.
for us. But I have maybe two questions. Okay.
Please.
The first question now, maybe we say about the future. If I just say about my 15 years from now, maybe some change. But now we can say about the roles of China and the United States in the future. Now we can see that English maybe is the dominant international language now. That's okay. But in the future, maybe based on the AI, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things and big data, and now China go ahead of the United States. So now a lot of invention, a lot of patents invented by the China. So maybe they can create new things. So they can create the new language for the mankind. But whether or not the English or American English maybe can stand nearly the same position now, because maybe if a country maybe can take the most advanced technological achievement, that means they can maybe create a new language for the rest of the world. So maybe we can say about maybe some change the role of China, mainland China and the United States. I would like to know about your opinion. The first question. Okay. The first question, but not the second question. Very small. Okay. Very easy.
I'm going to forget the first question.
Very easy. Very easy.
Okay.
But now in Vietnam now, we say about that there might be some change, some maybe drastic change in the society. The first one, artificial intelligence can kill the people. Okay, AI kill the people because AI have a lot of maybe more the greater number of neural cellular than human brains. The second one maybe digital money can kill the paper money. So
I'm sorry, what was the last part again?
Yeah, digital might be Bitcoin. Okay, Bitcoin can kill, can replace the paper currency now. Because we, for example, Libra invented by the Facebook, they can replace the paper currency.
Okay.
So now they can replace the maybe central bank. But how we can stand now? Okay.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Well, it's up. No, I have mine.
Okay, yes.
Thank you so much for your question. It's a very big question. A lot. No small questions. There's a lot to cover in there. I think that my first thought that I want to address is if I understood some of your concern about what could happen with AI in terms of could it become deadly? Is that kind of where you were? So this is that has come out of the media to a great degree. When you watch certain movies, it's been something that's gone on for 20, 30, 40 years, where because we tell stories a certain way, it's very common to have AI become malevolent, become bad. And it also assumes that it is of a certain kind of intelligence that really may not be how it's going to develop. We have much more to worry about, I believe, about how other human beings use AI and how that is misused than how the AI itself will supposedly behave. But there are definitely issues that have to be considered in terms of, for different countries, for different leaders, for different groups, how there are some places where it's going to be easier to push back to say we don't want to have technology, whether it's AI or something else, do certain things. There are going to be other places where it's harder to make that statement. And so it's going to be an ongoing challenge, and a different one for different groups, for different places. Not an easy answer regardless. So anyway, that hopefully addresses a little bit of it for you. Yes. So thank you so much for your question. I appreciate it. Yes?
So first of all, I would like to thank you so much for informative presentation. So after listening to your presentation, I come up with two questions. So one of them, firstly, because you mentioned about the technology. So because nowadays the technology is driving our society. So in terms of business, so we could get a lot of benefits from the technology. But besides of that, we also can see that the technology also brings up a lot of drawbacks in terms of information management. So in business, how could business could reduce these drawbacks, and how come? And also the other question you mentioned about climate change. Because nowadays we really care about the climate, and it's also drive our society. And so from my point of view, personally, I can see the conflict between the technology and climate change. How could we are human beings, how could we build up the future life based on climate change and the technology effectively? And thank you so much.
Wonderful. Two very important questions, and thank you so much for asking them. Let me start with the the environment and climate change first. So this is something that is worrying more and more people, rightly so. In many respects, there is a lot of momentum. There's a lot of pressure to overcome in terms of certain kinds of business that don't want to lose as they perceive it, lose their profit. But in some ways, we have to actually impress upon them that is actually very, very important to us. Now, I don't know if you follow what's happening right now in politics in the UK, the United Kingdom, but in Britain right now, they are in the midst of approaching an election, and one of the platform items that I just saw was the idea of delisting from the stock exchange those businesses that do not actually engage in behaviors that are good for the climate. And this was something that was proposed by their Labour Party here in the last day or so. I don't know if that one is going to be very within their system. I don't know if that's going to be legal or feasible. But the idea is that all of us, individually, we only can make a small impression. But if all of us say this is important to us, that goes a long way. If we don't buy from certain types of businesses because they aren't being good to the environment, that might actually affect their bottom line in a way that allows them to recognize that maybe they should change. So hopefully it's a simple answer, but I don't have a really deep one for that first or that second question. And very, very briefly, what was the first part of your question again? It was about the technology and...
So my question is related about information management.
Yes.
Because the more technology develops, the more it brings up
Yeah.
a lot of problems about
I have it now. Thank you. So in terms of new technologies, especially those that utilize a lot of information that is personal data, that is information about us, there are ideas, there are some things that are being floated out there in terms of methods of isolating different parts of the process so that we actually own our data and have more control over how it is used and where it is used, and we end up choosing what we're going to, where we're going to open it up to in a much more siloed way so that our data is protected in one place and it's not all owned by the same mega company, mega corporation like a social media giant or what have you. And the idea is feasible, but I think it will take a lot of work, but I think it'll also take a lot of shift of how those companies currently do business. But there are some ideas out there that are working in that kind of direction. So hopefully that answers your question, and thank you so much for your insight. Oh, thank you. Sir? Might be, okay.
First of all, thank you so much for the great talk, and it's really inspiring. And yeah, you talk a lot about the future, yes, and it's not the future because you have many futures and many possibilities. And also, like, the future is really like difficult to predict exactly, and there's a lot of prediction that in the next 20 years or something, the majority of jobs that being like the majority of job there in the future has not is not existed today even.
True.
And yes, and my question is for young people right now, like what should and how could we prepare for future or futures? Yes.
A really good question, thank you. Just to kind of reiterate that a little bit, the idea that we have all of these new possible jobs that don't exist yet, and how do we identify which are going to make sense? Well, part of it is the idea that what we, in some respects, need to do, especially if the world is going to change so rapidly, is going, if we're going to see certain jobs go away on a regular basis, how do we address this? Well, if we look back at our grandparents, our parents, they often got their education or did their job, and pretty much the same job all of their lives. That has become less and less common. We see people today have multiple careers over the span of their lifetime. It's different in different countries, obviously, but it is a general progression. It's estimated in the U.S. that the people who are teenagers today will have between 15 to 20 different jobs by the time they are 40. And that differs between different countries, I know, but part of that indicates a trend that suggests that maybe what we have to do is we have to move away from this idea that we're going to be trained and work at a single job or a single type of job all of our lives, and instead move toward a model where we're thinking more along the lines of lifelong learning. It takes a different mindset, but it also takes some differences in the institutions of our country. How we go to school might have to change. You can't, it's hard. If you've established a family, you have a home, you have a mortgage, and you can't take 4 years off very easily and go back to school, especially if by the time you finish your 4 years, maybe that job's not there now. But if instead, and this is an ongoing trend, you have companies themselves engage in more and more in-house, internal training to be able to support their employees, to be able to not lose them on a regular basis. This is an ongoing trend. So you have people like the Boeing company, which is actually based where I live in Seattle, They put $100 million up to be able to have this kind of training here recently. Somebody else, PricewaterhouseCoopers? One of the big groups committed something like $3 billion to doing, essentially improving the education of their employees so that they don't lose people on a regular basis. They gain that benefit and that efficiency of having that continuation, not losing legacy knowledge and things like that. So the idea of having ongoing training might just be part of the answer. It's a different way, and some people will resist it. I happen to like learning all the time, so it works for me. But it's a different way of approaching things, and I think that might be part of the solution. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so based on your answer, I emerge another question. Like,
which job in particular?
no, it's
okay.
like you can have the approach to education, like it's a continuous process.
Yes.
But so there are two opinions. One would be like you should be really good at one thing, or you should be like I see the trend right now is like the leaders, maybe they're going more into the interdisciplinary way.
Interdisciplinary, yes.
So
Yeah.
what is your point of...
I think we're all individuals, and we all have different skills, different skill sets, different talents. So for some people, you can point to certain types of work. You can also point to different approaches to work. So someone like myself, I'm very much comfortable with what's a generalist or an interdisciplinary approach. But we still need surgeons. I don't want a generalist surgeon. I want a specialist surgeon. So there are going to be needs in both camps. So I don't think it's a question that it's either or. It's both, and it's more a matter of identifying what's important to us as an individual at the same time that we're looking at the overall world and saying, okay, will this still be here? And there may be special counselors in the future who help us to identify these kinds of jobs are going to be up and coming, are going to become more prevalent in time, things like that. So that's one approach. Thank you so much for your question. Sir?
First, I want to thank you for your interesting talk. And second, I'm a business student, and I want to ask you two questions.
Mm-hmm.
First, what do you think about the future of marketplace for students majoring in business and economics like me?
Mm-hmm.
And second, what skills and knowledge should we learn to adapt to the new changes in the marketplace for business students, and to adapt? I think that what new skills and knowledge I want to know. Yes, thank you.
Excellent question. I think that's really hitting at the heart of what I'm talking about here. And I think the skills are going to be, within business, you're going to be seeing more and more working directly with software and AI. It will involve a level of using it as it will be a closer relationship as a tool than what we have been using in the past. Just imagine that let's just say AR glasses that are going to be very, very much more prevalent in this next decade. If you're interacting with a bunch of data, perhaps you're seeing it on your glasses, that's just an interface, that's just a method. But you have to actually understand how it's used and why it would be used. Well, if you have an AI that is able to guide some of that decision-making process, not all of it, because there's value in our intuition, in certain aspects of human insight that will still be there, understanding what's important in terms of human values, things like that. So depending on the kind of business that you're going into, perhaps it will involve more study of informatics, information and how it is used and interrelated. Perhaps it will be more about management theory. It really it's a big field. And so as you know, a number of different directions you can go. I just think that it's going to be more interactive between ourselves and our technology, much as I was saying for some other types of jobs as well. So I don't have a real specific answer of where to go with it, but I think it will be really dependent on what your end goal is in business. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's time's up. So yeah, if any one of you have question with the speaker, you can talk with him after the event.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thanks for coming, and I hope to see you in other events at the American Center.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. Let me just leave you with one final thought after this. We are living in a world, in a time of enormous transformational change. This is going to affect all aspects of our lives, and ultimately we really have to plan and use foresight. We have to anticipate the types of things that are coming in a much more structured, a much more fundamental way than we have been in the past, because the future is going to be here sooner than we think. So thank you so much all for coming.